So I am Paul Debevec.
And don't look at the camera, look at me.
Right, okay. I'm Paul Debevec, P-A-U-L-D-E-B-E-V-E-C, and I am the Associate Director for Graphics Research at the University of Southern California's Institute for Creative Technologies.
Excellent. Let me just make sure that a little bit straighter, please.
This is good. Yeah, any advice to make this look a little better?
Okay. Perfect, that looks great. Okay.
And how low does the shot go? Do you have my hands in right now? Or,
no, I don't. It ends
right
right. Yeah, right.
Okay, got it.
Okay, so can you please start by telling me where you were born, where you grew up?
Okay. Well, I was actually born in Princeton, New Jersey. My father was in graduate school at the time. But the town that I grew up in, we moved when I was 6 years old to Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. My father went there to take a faculty position in the physics department. And I lived there all through high school, went to University High School, and then stayed there until I went to college.
Fantastic. Okay, and tell me a little bit about what you were like as a child.
Oh, goodness. Maybe a better question for my mom, but it's good that she's not answering because that would be embarrassing. Let's see. So when I was a kid, I liked math. I really had a lot of fun in my art classes. I don't know if I was ever particularly good in the art classes, but I really enjoyed that. And I liked photography. I didn't get into that until I was in high school. But when I was in high school, I ended up being a photographer for the newspaper and for the yearbook, and getting to develop, hundreds or thousands of photographs in the darkrooms there, and getting to learn that. So that was fun. I tried to try out for some plays and things like that. So I played David Letterman in a high school play, which was kind of fun. That's an amusing video. And I got some appreciation of what it takes to act and perform, although I don't think I had any particular skills in that area. And it was a pretty fun high school experience, so I had a good time with that.
What about computers and technology? Would you say that you were very computer savvy when you were younger, or when did you know that technology would play such a large part in your life?
I think I got interested in computers because my father would take me to his nuclear physics laboratory, because he'd have to work on the weekend. So it's like, okay, well, every Saturday can be take your kid to work day. And I would end up, sitting in the lab. He'd set me up on a computer, which at that time was punched cards, those cardboard things. And he'd just set me up typing random things on these. So computers kind of looked cool. And somehow I got the sense you can use computers to make pictures, and that got very attractive. So I really recall, about 10 years old, I had a paper route, saving up my paper route money to buy a computer. And I bought a Commodore VIC-20 computer that had, one of these stories where it had less, memory than, somebody's wristwatch. I mean, it really did. It had 3.5K of memory. When you started programming on it. And I remember in the computer store, as I was deciding whether to buy this thing or not, asking the salesperson, can I take any individual pixel and write a program to turn it on and off? Not just show letters, I want to make pictures on this thing. And they said, I think if you get into the really advanced modes, you can do some stuff like that. So it turns out you really had to start to learn how to use the chips and address individual memory locations to make this happen. But as soon as I got it home, I was trying to make pictures with the thing, and I had a lot of fun with that.
How old were you when all of that happened?
I think I was pretty much 10 and 11 years old, starting to do that. And it got a lot more exciting when I was 12 or 13. I got a Commodore 64 computer that had 64K of memory, so that just seemed completely expansive at the time. It had twice the resolution, twice as many colors, and you could do a lot more interesting things. I wrote some of my first programs to do 3D graphics that would do wireframes of objects spinning around in perspective, and I was so fixated. I had to get that 3D look. I had to get it where it looks like it's receding into the distance, and I worked out enough mathematics that I could do that projection and get some stuff to spin around.
What is it about 3D or making something look really realistic that gets you excited?
I think it's just being able to create your own version of reality. I mean, sometimes you meet somebody and it seems like they're just living in their own world. Well, it's pretty fun to be able to create your own version of the world and then create visualizations of it, because it's really, you've created something, that didn't exist before, and then you can also share it with other people. You can bring other people by, take a look at this thing spinning around. There's this whole series of events in computer graphics where people were just trying to create something because that's so cool. And I think most of our major advances in the field have been because some person worked overnight just to they had some vision of what they wanted to see on the screen and they wanted to show it to their friends the next day. And I've definitely motivated a lot by trying to do something like that.
And you were a paper boy at that age, is that what you said? Yeah,
I delivered papers for the Champaign-Urbana News-Gazette for about 2 years after school.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. So did you play video games when you were younger?
I did. I wasn't into it as much as some kids were, but I had an Atari 2600, which was a pretty pioneering video game machine. So Space Invaders and Asteroids, I think, were the home versions that you could have for those things. And then the Commodore 64 was actually pretty popular as a game machine in its own right. So you could show up to your friend's house, trade games. And there were some really neat games like that. One of the games that came out was Karateka, and it was it was like a little karate game where two guys go and they kick each other, but it had really cool music and it had a lot of cinematic design to it. Like it would cut from this one scene and then would cut to another scene where it shows like the big bad guy is dispatching another fellow to go fight you. Eventually you end up fighting the bad guy himself. And I was pretty amazed by that. And one of the cool things about being here in Los Angeles and getting to interact with some of the entertainment industries, I've actually met the creator of that game that I played as a kid. His name's Jordan Mechner, and he's been involved in the Prince of Persia video games, and now the Prince of Persia movie that actually is the cinematic version of his creation. So that's one of the neat things about my job, is that a lot of the stuff that I saw growing up I've gotten to meet, and in some cases even work with some of the people who created this stuff that I found very inspiring.
That's very cool. Okay. Now, can you tell me about after high school, a little bit about the work you did after that, where you went to school, and how you ended up here?
Great question. So when I graduated from high school, I had a couple of options to maybe go to college on the East Coast, or I could have just stayed at the University of Illinois. And my father recommended getting out of Champaign-Urbana, seeing a little bit more of the world. I ended up at the University of Michigan. And the University of Michigan didn't have a lot of computer graphics going on at the time, but it was strong in another area of computer science called computer vision. And this is the field where you develop computer programs and algorithms that analyze images. So the input to the program you write is a digital photograph, 2D images, and the job of computer vision programs is to understand what's in there, either figure out the 3D structure, figure out which kind of objects are there. If there are many images of the same scene, figure out how they all relate to each other spatially. And I got to study some of these techniques. I actually took a graduate level computer vision class from Professor Ramesh Jain when I was a sophomore there, and I had a real blast in that class. And he ended up writing me a very strong recommendation to join a computer vision group at the University of California, Berkeley. So after 4 years at Michigan, I'd looked at going to either Berkeley or Stanford, which, as it turns out, both were really good schools. And Professor Jitendra Malik, who ended up being my PhD advisor, had actually read my application. He was in the field of computer vision. And he actually took a real interest in getting me over to Berkeley. So when I got that phone call that they'll supplement my fellowship and wanted to get me over there, I felt, okay, these people want me. So I went to UC Berkeley and had a really good time over there.
Okay. And then what about coming to work at USC, to be here?
So let's see. Well, I ended up spending about 8 years at Berkeley, and my PhD thesis was actually basically in the area of computer vision, but it had for it the purpose of doing computer graphics. It was analyzing images to understand the three-dimensional structure, to eventually create new images of the scene. And this turned out to be a really nice cross-fertilization of these two fields, of basically having computer vision techniques analyze the images, and then once you get a representation of the scene, using computer graphics to then render new views that either are shown in new viewpoints, new lighting conditions, you've moved the objects around in the scene. And the first major project that I got to help bring together at UC Berkeley was this photogrammetric model and this fly around of the UC Berkeley campus. So this is in like '96, I finished my PhD thesis, and I got to stay on for about 3 years as a postdoctoral researcher to explore some extensions of this work. So the first thing that I did is I thought it would be really great to try to create a 3D model of the UC Berkeley campus so that you could, virtually fly around it with a fun camera path and then be able to show it like photorealistically, like you actually were flying around with a real helicopter, even though it's like a pretty impossible shot to take. And after taking about 20 photographs of the campus, some from the tower, some looking out from the tower, and stitching them together into models, working with a really cool team of students there, we made a short 2.5-minute film called the Campanile movie that really showed that you could create a scene photorealistically from just still images and then animate flying around the scene afterwards. And that was kind of fun. And that helped me have something interesting to show at the SIGGRAPH conference. So SIGGRAPH is SIG's special interest group in graphics. It's part of the Association for Computing Machinery. And it actually is an annual conference every year that brings together academics researching computer graphics techniques, and then a lot of people from different industries. So artists, architectural designers, industrial designers, and people from the entertainment industry as well, visual effects supervisors from places like Industrial Light and Magic and Digital Domain. They go to SIGGRAPH every year to see what the new stuff is. And they have a computer animation festival where we submitted this Campanile movie, which actually got seen by a lot of the people in the movie industry. And what was exciting about that is that that technology ended up getting picked up and being used and extended to create some of the bullet time shots in the movie The Matrix. So that was sort of the first time that stuff that I'd had something to do with in the university environment had gone on to have a significant influence on something that a lot of people had seen on the movie screen. So in the next couple of years at Berkeley, I developed a couple of new techniques that involved lighting and involved capturing people's faces. That also ended up having relevance to the entertainment industry. And at about the same time, I realized that you just can't be a postdoctoral researcher forever. At some point, you need to get something that sort of approximates having a real job. And if I hadn't realized it, then other people, like the faculty at Berkeley, were I think pretty soon to realize it for me. And so I had to find a place to get a real job. Well, in January of '99, a delegation came through that was the people that were trying to create the USC Institute for Creative Technologies. And they didn't know where they were going to put it. They wanted it to be an academic institution that would collaborate with the entertainment industry to try to push forward the next generation of virtual reality. And they weren't sure if they were going to put it at UC Berkeley, or at UCLA, or at USC. So this delegation went around to these 3 universities, and when they came around in January '99 to Berkeley, they asked, the faculty asked, could I give a presentation to show some of the work I was doing, like this Campanile movie, and show Berkeley's doing some really interesting stuff in this area. So the delegation liked my presentation, and they kind of took note of my name at that point, but ultimately they decided to put the ICT at USC. And that got announced in August of '99. And shortly after that, I was actually in contact with them about a potential position here at the USC Institute for Creative Technologies. So I actually had one more project I was doing at UC Berkeley in the fall of '99, which was building the first light stage. So we published that in January, or submitted it in January, and then I started consulting and preparing to move my laboratory down to USC. And then I got here in April of 2000, which is about 10 years ago, almost to the day.
Wow. So you were sort of stolen away from Berkeley almost, weren't you?
I think Berkeley was going to kick me out within the year anyway, so.
Okay, very cool. So you've been here for almost 10 years now.
Yep.
And you guys will be moving soon as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Can you tell me a little bit about your experience here? What have you really loved about being here?
Well, it was definitely a shift coming from the Bay Area to moving down here to Los Angeles. And I actually remember the day, it was like, 2 years ago, where I had lived in Southern California as long as I had ever lived in Northern California. So now I'm officially like a Southern Californian, not a displaced Northern Californian. And I like it. I mean, our institute's not that far from the beach, and living out here on the west side is a pretty cool environment. Getting to rollerblade down the beach on Sunday mornings is a pretty enviable situation. And being able to go in the water on occasion and not completely freeze yourself is definitely a benefit LA has over the San Francisco area. Although I deeply love going back to San Francisco, and always make sure to get some of their deep dish pizza they have up here, because I have not found an equally great place to experience that in the Los Angeles area. If anyone out there has any suggestions, please, I'm sure you can find my email somewhere on the site here. The idea of being here at the, or the experience of being here at the ICT has been extremely interesting, because I work with the graphics group, but there are other groups exploring other parts of technology that have to do with virtual reality. So for example, Professor Mark Bolas, who is also at the USC School for Cinematic Arts, is doing a number of projects that are advancing immersive display systems. So he works with tiny little video projectors, projecting them onto interesting display surfaces to get stereo views back to people. He's got a motion capture facility with very advanced blinky LEDs. He's got head-mounted display systems where you can peer into them and see a whole virtual world in a wide field of view. And he's working on virtual reality from the display aspect of that. And he's been a great collaborator as well. We worked with him to develop our group's 3D display device that was one of the first 360-degree auto-stereoscopic, no 3D glasses displays. And it's hard to imagine that project having gone nearly as well without having all of the great contributions that Mark and some of his collaborators up from the Bay Area were able to add to that. We also have a lot of work going on in the field of artificial intelligence here. And in fact, my boss is an artificial intelligence researcher who came from the Information Sciences Institute. And we have a number of researchers who are working on the virtual humans problem, not the way that our graphics lab thinks about virtual humans, which is like, let's render a photoreal face. They're thinking about, let's simulate a compellingly realistic digital mind. Let's create some sort of digital thought process that can answer questions, can respond to situations, and actually can emotionally respond. It actually has an emotional state, and the sort of decisions that it makes are influenced by how it's thinking about a certain situation, if it's panicked or angry or calm or happy about things, if it's trusting of the other person. And that's really something that I think going forward at the Institute is going to be very exciting, because we're just to the point now where our digital faces are starting to look pretty photoreal, and some of our collaborations with the entertainment industry have helped us see our technology be part of processes that have gotten us to the point where we can do photoreal digital people. That's pretty exciting for us. And now the idea is maybe we can actually start giving them compellingly photoreal, but experientially real thought processes as well, so that we can have a digital human that isn't just puppeteered by an actor's performance, but is something you can really interact with. And it's just great to be part of this institute and have that mix of ideas around.
That's really exciting. That's sort of scary and really cool at the same time.
Yeah.
So I would love to talk to you about the intersection between what you do and the entertainment industry.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the movies and projects that you've been involved in, and in what capacity were you involved?
Great. Well, so as I mentioned a little bit before, the first time that techniques that had been developed in our laboratory, which is my little ragtag group I had up at UC Berkeley, had a significant impact on motion pictures was for the movie The Matrix. And that Campanile movie one of the people who saw it at the SIGGRAPH conference in 1997 in the film festival, which was actually held in the Los Angeles Shrine Auditorium just across the street from campus. I mean, I was there in August '97, and you know, my little 2.5-minute film came up as part of the show, and there were thousands of people in the audience, and it was pretty exciting. One of the people who saw it that night was a visual effects supervisor named John Gaeta, who was working on some crazy, weird science fiction movie, not a huge budget and sort of a little weird in a couple ways, which turned out to be the movie The Matrix. And he was trying to solve a visual effects problem of how to, you know, spin a camera around an actor so that you could actually see the background moving in all of the correct perspective and matching in to this time slice rig shot that was being taken. And when he saw that we could take photos of a real environment, reconstruct the geometry, project the photos back on, and then spin around photorealistically or close to photorealistically, he realized this is a great piece of technology to employ. And he ended up getting in touch with my group. He ended up hiring one of the students I'd supervised on the project. And kind of the rest is history. They ended up using it as the virtual backgrounds for all of the bullet time shots, and the movie went on to win the Oscar for Best Visual Effects that year. And you know, that's why I thought, you know, there were two things. It's like, okay, go work directly in industry and get to be applying this technique all the time and working directly on the films. But the thing that I ended up deciding to do more was, well, let's stay in research, because you have the chance to do the thing that might enable the next possible advance, or at least contribute to it in some way. And you know, it won't just be on one specific film necessarily. It might get used on films that every studio makes. And the work that I and my team got to do in doing photoreal digital faces, of trying to capture you know, the shape of somebody's face, how it reflects light, how it looks when it's lit from every direction with our light stage devices, turned out to be something that really satisfied, you know, kind of both of those desires, both to be involved in research that's creating new technology that could be, you know, applied broadly, but also to actually work directly on some actual motion picture productions. And when we got down to the ICT, our first light stage device was just this sort of wooden spinny thing that was up at UC Berkeley and only existed for about a month before I had to give the space back to Sean Brixey, who let me use it over the Christmas break. Thanks again, Sean. But they said, yeah, you should build another light stage. So we actually built Light Stage 2, which is down on the first floor of our building here. And it had like a semicircular arm of strobe lights. It rotated around more quickly than the previous light stage did. And the folks over at Sony Pictures Imageworks, which is just up Washington, got in touch with me in late 2002, said we're working on a superhero movie, and we're trying to figure out how to create photoreal digital stunt doubles for this film. And they were wondering if we could possibly help and maybe apply our light stage technology to the film. So they actually brought over you know, some production assistant they had as a test subject. We scanned them in the light stage with their film cameras running, much higher resolution than anything we'd ever shot ourselves. And that worked out well enough that they decided to bring over 2 of the actors from the movie Spider-Man 2, which is what they were working on, to try to create photoreal digital stunt doubles of them. And they brought over, on one day, Alfred Molina, who played Doc Ock, who was just a lovely gentleman and very funny, and sat him in the stage. And the poor guy, he just put on like a bunch of weight to play Diego Rivera in the Frida movie. So poor fellow had to like sit there all tubby with his shirt off and, you know, have lights going around, because for some reason Doc Ock kind of has his coat open a lot. But we scanned him. He was fun. And the next day they brought over Tobey Maguire, Spider-Man himself. We didn't know quite why we were scanning Tobey, although we were all excited to meet Spider-Man. Because usually whenever he's doing anything really exciting, he's got his mask on. You can't see his face. So it wasn't until the film actually came out that we saw that scene where he's got to stop the train and before it runs off the end of the tracks, and he's got his mask ripped off for some reason for that scene. So we shot a bunch of data and turned it over to our collaborators over at Sony Imageworks, which included Scott Stockdike, their visual effects supervisor, Mark Sagar, and John Monos, who were 2 of the computer graphics supervisors there. And they worked their tails off to try to get our research techniques implemented into their pipeline and to extend them so it would work with all of their traditional rendering techniques for like the hair and the sunglasses and all the other parts of the digital characters. And when it came out, the shots looked great, and very thankfully, it was a really good movie too. I think Spider-Man 2 is, ranked as, one of the top superhero movies of all time. So we got really lucky, and we got a film credit on that. I got to, wait till the end of the film and see it scroll up, and oh my gosh, there's us right there. That's kind of cool. So that actually started an interesting chain of events. I mean, Spider-Man 2 won the Oscar for Best Visual Effects, and so people were thinking maybe this is a good technique to use. So for the movie King Kong, Mark Sagar had gone down to Weta Digital in New Zealand, which had just finished up all the Lord of the Rings movies. And they needed to do a digital version of Naomi Watts to be grabbed around by the big ape guy. So they brought Naomi Watts over to Light Stage 2. We shot her on digital cameras, which was really exciting. For Superman Returns, they brought over Brandon Routh, who was the guy cast as the new Superman, who actually in person sounds a lot like Clark Kent. That was kind of cool. And they scanned him at like 4,000 pixel resolution, 6 Aeroflex film cameras all the way around with our little strobe light rig going around, and they got incredibly high detail of every skin pore, fine crease, how the light looks, and that digital double of Brandon Routh is still today probably the best, highest resolution digital double that is made in a motion picture. And there are shots in the film where I didn't know they were digital until somebody told me afterwards. And in fact, there were shots in that movie where they had originally filmed the real actor, Brandon Routh, flying around on a green screen, thinking they would just replace the background and then that would be their shot in the film. And they'd like put the camera on some kind of track and a motion control to get all the motion. And as often happens in filmmaking, once you're actually putting the shot together, you realize, oh, it would have been nice if we'd lit it a little differently, because this foreground element, of the guy isn't quite believably sitting in the background. Doesn't look like there's the same light here and here. Or, the way that the camera moved around wasn't quite fast enough and like the shot's taking too long. So what do you do at that point? Well, they realized that their team had done such a good job of creating this digital character using our light stage data and the ton of work that Sony ImageWorks did as well, that they had a digital version of the actor they could just recreate the shot with. And they ended up replacing real footage of Brandon Routh, of course, looking at his performance and trying to, as faithfully as possible, map it onto the digital character. And they replaced the real guy with the digital guy in a number of shots. And that was a real sign that the technology had kind of come to a certain level of maturity where you can actually, do something that was going to be a real person. They used us one more time with that kind of process for the movie Hancock. And that was interesting because we had, 2 of the biggest stars that we'd ever had come to the laboratory, which were Will Smith and Charlize Theron. And, normally, scanning movie actors, obviously it's kind of an interesting thing to do. It's a very small portion of the time that we have in the laboratory. It's like, once every few months that we have someone noteworthy coming in and, we scan them for the day and then we're back to our research the next day and they cover all of our effort and time for that day. But it's certainly something that, is a little bit of a blip of activity. And hosting an A-list movie actor here is definitely a little bit different because you have to do things like have the street cleared the night before so that they can park their double-decker expander trailer out in front of your building for the next day. So Will Smith has this trailer that he bought and then rents out to productions that hire him where there's actually 5 expansion sections, like 2 in front come out and 2 in back come out. He's got a movie theater and a weight room, and then the whole top of the thing comes up and it becomes like 2 stories. And normally, I try to have this work as much as possible sort of fly under the radar here at the Institute, like not let everybody know that we've got crazy stuff going on. We don't want to distract from, all the other work going on here. And that just became very difficult in this particular case, especially since he canceled on us twice, because like the first time was like the day after the American Music Video Awards, and he just had a lot of activity apparently that night before, and just wasn't ready to be scanned the next day. So there were a couple things like that, but then within 5 minutes of meeting him, he had everybody laughing. He is such an incredible entertainer and a really awesome fellow as well. So we had him over in the light stage and scanned him for Hancock. Charlize Theron, who would be warned a little bit about, was just totally nice as well. So that was a good experience. There's 2 other films that we've done recently that have really pushed the boundaries of the technology quite a bit. And it actually uses a new version of our light stage process. It uses our full sphere of lights and some very special lighting conditions where we're not just doing one light at a time and using that as an exhaustive data set of how a face reflects light, but we are capturing really pore level detail, like skin pore level detail of the shape of the face, and enough information in few enough photographs to predict how it would look lit from any direction. And that technology got used on the movie The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, which is, through the work of Digital Domain. We're a small part of this whole process, but we did contribute to it. That had the first photoreal digital actor in a movie, because the first 52 minutes of that film, it's a totally digital head of an old version of Brad Pitt that, it was more than they could have just done with makeup. And very few people had any problem with the realism of those visual effects. It just looked like that was, a real old man there, and you just believed it. And, he wasn't just sort of flying around stoically like Superman. He was actually interacting with other actors right next to him, and was, going through different, very familiar lighting environments, through, houses and walking down the street. All of that just had to be done very perfectly. It was very difficult work to do, and we were happy to contribute a couple of technologies that helped Digital Domain do their amazing work on that project. And then the most recent stuff was for the movie Avatar, and for that we got to scan 5 of the actors and contribute to the digital versions of those, both the alien versions that are well known for being done in computer graphics, but also photoreal digital human characters as well for a lot of those battle sequences at the end that look pretty believable too. So it's been an interesting ride.
And I noticed your shirt there. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So this is actually my friends at Weta Digital got a hold of a, this is an actual crew t-shirt from Weta Avatar shots crew. So folks who worked on the movie, you might see them wearing a shirt like this. So it's inspired a little bit, I guess, by like the RDA organization. So slightly paramilitary here. So
right.
Very, very proud to have one of these things here from that amazing crew down there.
And I've sort of heard that, because so many people contributed to Avatar, that it almost feels a little bit like and because it took so long to produce as well, it feels like a little bit like a community. Do you think you feel part of that sort of Avatar community?
Definitely. I mean, Avatar was an enormous effort. I mean, it was hundreds of millions of dollars to create, and it started as early as 1996. James Cameron apparently started writing the story back then, and then he had to wait until it seemed like the technology was ready in order to create it. And we were really, I mean, again, we didn't spend a huge number of total days contributing to the film. It's mostly like, okay, this is a day that we're doing some scanning, and okay, we're doing Avatar today, but then it's back to the research the next day. We did contribute over a very long period of time. And the first meeting that I had was probably even in 2005 when some people from Lightstorm Entertainment came by. Rob Legato, who was the visual effects supervisor for Titanic, had been asked by James Cameron to do a fact-finding mission to all the people who were developing new technology that might be relevant to his film, and to come up with sort of a rough cut of what the system would be, the virtual camera system and the computer graphics process that could create this vision that would be on the screen. And so Rob Legato and Lightstorm's producer Brooke Breton came over to our laboratory. She'd been over before, she knew about our light stages, and they actually sat right where I am right now, and we did a demo of our latest light stage processes to them, and that got it on the map and on the radar of the production that was creating these things. And then some of my friends, so Mark Sagar, I mentioned, who'd done some of the King Kong work and was involved in Spider-Man 2 before. He's a native New Zealander, so he very naturally had a great opportunity to work at Weta through this. I talked to him after the SIGGRAPH conference, which was in Boston in 2006. He came back through LA, and I showed him the latest version of our high-resolution face scanning process, and he could see that our new maps were getting this skin pore level detail and calibrated texture maps and reflectance maps that were much more directly usable in a graphics pipeline than the earlier work we'd done. He got very excited about it, and they had just started to shoot the motion capture for Avatar very close to our institute here, actually just across Jefferson in some of the old Howard Hughes aircraft assembly buildings. They had set that up as a big motion capture stage, and they had the actors over there, and most of the movie was acted out actually quite close to here. So apparently, like within weeks of when that SIGGRAPH conference happened in 2006, they brought over actors Sam Worthington and Zoe Saldana for us to scan them. And it was like the first time we'd commercially applied this scanning technology. We were scrambling to get a device set up so we could turn their face to different angles and get that built. We got some pretty good scans of them right then. And over the years, actually after we upgraded the system, they brought them back and we scanned them even at higher resolution. They realized that the kind of maps we were getting could be relevant to how they create the digital plants, because the plant of Pandora has so much foliage in it that they'd love to have little samples of the shape and the texture of real ferns and real pitcher pot plants and such. And so they brought over a pretty good section of the Home Depot garden department for us to stick in the light stage and process it with our data. And that becomes, that's like a tiny bit of what goes into their enormous, incredible process to create all of those assets, but we were happy to contribute that. They brought over Joel David Moore, who plays Norm Spellman, who is a very funny fellow. And then even just last year, they brought over two more of the actors, who were Stephen Lang, who plays Colonel Quaritch. And they actually went and had the makeup people put his scars on his face, and we captured him in the light stage. And we also had this new process where we can capture performances, so like 24 frames per second of geometry and reflectance. And we got to try out this new experimental process on him, as well as on Sigourney Weaver. And she was definitely a very exciting person to welcome to the laboratory and do that. So we were working on the film over that whole 4-year period as well. I went down to Weta. I definitely have some good friends there. And visited in November of 2009, like a month before the movie was going to come out. And I knew and definitely thought I was going to be like kind of flying into the eye of the storm where, this is not only like the biggest visual effects movie of all time, but it's a James Cameron picture on top of that. I heard stories about what it was like trying to finish Titanic. And I thought, I would just be like, seeing frantic people at work and, spending evenings, by myself while everybody was working on that. And as it turns out, when I got there at the beginning of the week, there were like 93 shots left to do. By the end of the week, there were 30 shots left to do, and most of the people were done. It's like if you still had a shot, yeah, you're still showing up to work, but at that point, most people's shots are done, and people are already starting to celebrate. So they did a great job. They finished on time, and there were some very happy people, very deservedly so, for creating that. It was completely amazing to get to be a small part of that whole process.
And how did it feel, because your name was in the credits, right?
Yeah.
How did that feel when you actually sat down and watched the movie for the first time, and to know that the plants you were seeing, you contributed to that texture, and the performances, especially in that fight scene at the end, that you contributed to that? What was that like?
It was really, it was great to be a part of this whole thing, because I had done so much to encourage my team. Hey, this is a train we want to be on. This is possibly going to be a big deal. And I remember very clearly the whole up and down drama of the movie Titanic, and reading in the summer of '97. It was supposed to come out in summer '97, and it didn't. It got delayed. It didn't come out till Christmas '97. This is James Cameron's last major visual effects spectacular. And there were all these thoughts that it was going way over budget and it's going to be the next water world, it's going to be a total disaster. And then it comes in and then it turns out to be the biggest motion picture of all time. Everybody's in love with it, men, women, younger people, older people. I just thought, we got to give the guy a chance again, that this could be something huge, this could be something big. So, when the movie comes out, I was there, for opening night and, made sure I got really good seats to see it in 3D in just the right spot. And it turns out it was like a really fun movie. And then learning that it had such a great opening weekend and that it started to be very popular, and then to the point where people are dressing up on Saturday Night Live as the Na'vi aliens and doing takeoffs of this, to the point where, the actors are starting to get really famous. The people that we'd been palling around with here in the laboratory, we're starting to see them everywhere, and then it becomes a worldwide phenomenon. It definitely felt like that was a wave, and, we were riding that wave a little bit as well. So I'm really thrilled for everyone involved that the film worked out so well, and we honestly were only too happy to contribute. We learned so much by getting to work with those teams, and it did an enormous amount for moving our research forward as well.
Got it. Now, what is next? What are you doing right now, and what should we be expecting to come out of the research that's going on here?
Great question. Well, we're at an interesting point because we know that it's possible to create a photoreal digital human character. And in our field, that was our big holy grail. That was our computer graphics, which we know can render buildings, and we know it can render sort of weird creatures like dinosaurs from Jurassic Park, and even funny little diseased hobbits like Gollum in Lord of the Rings. We know we can do that stuff, but are we really going to be able to create a human that looks real? And what we've seen through Benjamin Button in particular, and then a little bit more in Avatar, we know we're there. It's not easy yet. And we have a vision in our laboratory that we would like to be able to bring someone in to our light stage and scan them on Monday afternoon, and then by Friday have a ready-to-go digital version of that person that can be driven with performance capture and puppeteered and all of that. And we want it to be driven in real time. We want it to be running on, a modern, video game graphics card. And, if you pull the little sliders, you can make them smile, you can make them growl, you can do all these things. And then if you have, say just video of the person, can you have a computer analyze that video and drive the digital character with that? Right now, it takes many months and quite a bit of manual effort to put together all of those parts of the process to build a digital character. We were part of a project recently called the Digital Emily Project, and that was something where in March of 2008 they brought over a young actress named Emily O'Brien, and we scanned her. It only took an afternoon to scan her. It took us about 2 weeks to process all the data into all the facial scans. But then our collaborators, a company called Image Metrics, is this facial animation. It took them, with a very small team of people, but it took them about 4 months to create the fully ready-to-go digital version of her, and that even couldn't be rendered in real time. It looked amazing rendered, what we call offline rendering, where we let the computer crunch for an hour or so on every single frame of an animation. And that was a video that came out in the summer of 2008 that also kind of got across that boundary of a face that you can believe is a real human. We learned a ton from that project. We want to make that pretty much just a natural, not a lot of manual effort process, because our demonstrations that we're creating at the Institute, we want them to be able to be put together quickly. We don't want it to be only for multi-hundreds of millions of dollars of motion pictures, but we want this stuff into educational applications. We want this into in training simulations. We want this into video games. We want it into low-budget independent films, where eventually shooting it with digital actors is going to become less expensive than shooting it with real actors. We've already had a crossover point where it can be less expensive to shoot a movie on digital equipment than it was to shoot it on film. That wasn't the case when digital first came out. But I think that shooting things with digital actors on digital sets is eventually going to be the way that, you know, independent films will use it, and it'll only be high-budget feature films that will actually, you know, be going to the real locations and bringing lots of cast together to create those things. So we want to be part of that vision.
Wow, so you think that in the future it will actually be more cost-effective and easier to use digital rather than actual film?
It's got to happen. I mean, if you've, this is another kind of fun thing about living in Los Angeles, is that, you know, every couple of weeks you end up driving by some movie shoot, right? And you see all the trucks parked outside, and someone's got like a techno crane going and shooting something at your local shopping mall or something like that. I went home one weekend, and, you know, I saw they were going to be filming, and then when they actually filmed, they were shooting an Orlando Bloom movie that had like a $6 million budget, and they were filming it basically outside of, you know, where I live. I was completely amazed, I'm still astounded, that there were 15 big trucks parked all the way up and down the street to hold all the lighting equipment and the craft services and the camera cranes and whatever else they put in this truck and the actor's trailer and all of this other stuff, to do essentially what their location manager said is film Orlando Bloom walking around inside a house with a glass of wine and then eventually running around on the beach. And, you know, if that's a $6 million budget, they clearly, you know, blew $250,000 of it just in that one weekend to shoot those scenes. I don't know if ultimately that's sustainable. I mean, there were more than 100 people who had to work to make that happen, when you can imagine in the digital world, it would only need to be, you know, the actors, the directors, the writers, all those people are important. The cinematographer might be moving virtual lights around instead of, you know, real lights. But virtual lights are a lot lighter. They don't, you know, fall on people, and you don't need ladders to stick them up. All of these things become considerably easier to do. And if you think about it, like in architecture, we can use computers to design a building. We can use computers to render how it's going to look. We can do virtual fly-throughs. We can stick it into the environment. It obviously costs a lot less to use a real, I'm sorry, I got a little distracted. So it obviously costs a lot less to create and render a building in the digital world than to actually go out there with bricks and mortar and build the building. Like maybe it costs $1 million to do all the design work and rendering. It could cost $100 million to build the building. If you're making a movie, you never need to build the building. The final result of making a movie is nothing tangible. It is a stream of zeros and ones that indicate the pixel color of every location in every frame for 2 hours of footage. And that's stuff that can be created right out of a computer. So ultimately, this process of, you know, creating our entertainment, I think digital is going to become more and more important for it. And I think that Avatar, with all of the virtual production techniques that they developed for that, it's going to become an entire genre of film. I don't think that live action filmmaking is ever going to go away. I don't think it should ever go away. I think there's many interesting parts of the spontaneity and just the random occurrences that you wouldn't have expected if you had as much control as you do in the digital world that are wonderful to have for that. But I think digital is going to offer more and more options, and it's just going to become less and less expensive.
That's very cool. It's very exciting. Okay, let's talk about, you guys also produce and you have directed some of your own short films as well here. So can you talk a little bit about that, and specifically about the Parthenon project?
Mm-hmm. So, well, when I was at UC Berkeley, I had a good enough, relatively low responsibilities as a postdoc. I wasn't officially running anything, and I had enough capabilities and free time to do this, to actually do some filmmaking. And so for about 4 years running, we'd do like a research paper in the fall and then make a film in the spring that demonstrated some of the techniques. So I had a lot of fun doing that at UC Berkeley to help get the ideas out there. And then when I got to USC, I still had one more short film that I really wanted to make, which is about the Parthenon. And I just kind of fallen in love with the architecture and the history, reading about it in various museums, including one of the museums in Champaign-Urbana in my hometown, where they had casts of the Parthenon friezes. in a really interesting rendition of the history that occurred at that monument. And I thought that would be a good project to propose here that would motivate a lot of our research to be able to do things that it never had before and focus it in a way that we could bring together all these ideas and have a final product that was pretty interesting. So I knew that the Olympics were coming up in Athens in 2004, so this would probably be a good time where there'd be a lot of interest in the Parthenon. And I thought if we got some really cool computer graphics of this place that talked about its history a bit, or spoke to its history, that would be an interesting project. And we certainly could have gone and done a 3D model of some building in downtown LA. There's some nice architecture there, certainly. But I thought if we did the Parthenon itself, we're not going to get tired of looking at the Parthenon, every week for a while, because it's just such an amazing structure. And it's something that, has the historical importance and the architectural importance to really deserve this kind of treatment. And I was very lucky to bring in some funding from a company called Toppan Printing Incorporated in Japan that funds cultural heritage work. They do some amazing virtual cultural heritage as well. And that gave us an account that I could use for all of the Athens-specific and Parthenon-specific aspects of the research. So our main sponsors that we get from various government organizations and some support from the USC Provost's office as well. They're very happy for us to sponsor the research. They're not going to want to pay for us to go and scan stuff in Athens. So that whole bump up I found some funding for so we could do the flights over. And in particular, the part of the history that ended up being the biggest part of the film has to do with the current and remaining controversy over the Parthenon sculptures. So while the Parthenon is, of course, where it has been for the last 2,500 years in Athens, most of its sculptural decorations were removed about 200 years ago and taken to London, England. And there's some debate as to whether that was a good idea or not. Certainly getting them off the Parthenon was pretty intense work that involved, I'm sorry, I should turn that off.
Okay.
You can jump cut and stuff like that, right?
I can.
Okay, cool. Certainly getting the actual sculptures off the Parthenon was a somewhat odd affair that involved large saws, taking the front slabs of big blocks off, because that's what they carved into. The frieze was on blocks that were this thick, and so they would saw off about the first 5 inches and then take that across the over to England. One of the boats actually sank on the way there, and they salvaged all the stuff out, so we didn't lose anything. But the greatest sculptures of classical antiquity were sitting at the bottom of a harbor for a while, thanks to the British effort there. So those are in the British Museum right now. If you go there, one of the highlights, besides the Rosetta Stone, if you go into the Duveen Gallery, is a very interesting presentation of the frieze on 2 sides, and then the pediment sculptures are on either side of the gallery. But the Greeks have actually wanted the sculptures back in Athens for some time. They weren't really in a position to speak up about it in the early 1800s because they unfortunately were not in control of their own country at the time. They were still, Athens was still part of the waning Ottoman Empire, and the people who may or may not have given the British authorization to do so were, Turkish folks. And so the Greeks aren't thrilled about that aspect of the story either. Greece became the modern state that it is in the 1830s, and pretty much right after that they said, we really should have this cultural treasure of our country back, and that has continued until recently. Melina Mercouri, the famous actress from Greece, had a big campaign in the 1980s. They'd hoped to get them back, perhaps on loan, from Britain for the 2004 Olympics, but it was pretty clear that if they ever loan them to them, that's going to be a pretty permanent loan at that point. Well, I thought we've got computer graphics now where we can definitely scan the sculptures, get 3D models of those, and if we push our research further forward, we can probably scan the architecture as well and have the Parthenon, and then in the digital world, we can actually bring them back together. And that sort of was the dream of the film, is let's virtually reunite the Parthenon with its sculptures.
And do you feel that you achieved that?
I think we did, yes. I think we achieved bringing these back together because we got pretty nice models of the sculptures, accurate to a millimeter. We got a pretty nice model of the architecture, accurate to a centimeter. And we really got the way that these things looked, so that we could actually, when we put them together, light them with the same light so that, that sculpture on that architecture, it actually looks like it's put back together and it's part of the same scene. And the final sequence of the film, this is like most of my films, about 2.5 minutes long, but the whole final half of it is just this one continuous camera move that starts at the Parthenon without its sculptures, and then the sculptures briefly reappear, but then it pulls them back into the British Museum. And so with a matched camera handoff, this one continuous move goes from the Parthenon to the British Museum, and you get this very real sense of where those sculptures in the museum, the way they're displayed right now, used to be on the architecture. And one of the points the film makes, actually, is that the way that they're displayed in the British Museum is actually a somewhat inside-out way. Originally, all the frieze pointed out, and the pediments looked out that way and that way. In the British Museum, it's all facing in. And in order to transition from the metopes on the Parthenon to the British Museum, and then the frieze from one to the other, the pediments, you actually have to do this crazy camera path where it goes in and out, blends back and forth to try to link all of these things together. But that was the main visual element, as I just wanted to have this like slow tracking shot in the British Museum, and then it cross dissolves right with the sculptures in place to the British Museum disappears, and then there they are back on the Parthenon. And that I think we definitely achieved.
Excellent. Okay, I have about 4 minutes left on this tape. In those last 4 minutes, is there anything you would like to add, or anything you feel that I did not ask?
Good question. I think I talked about, did I talk about on camera a little bit about, AI and how we're thinking about bringing
Yes,
this?
you did.
Okay, good. So I think that's the long range vision of what we're doing here. I think I'd just like to say it's been really wonderful to be part of USC and in the Los Angeles area to do this work, because our institute is over here in the marina, but we have a wonderful relationship with so many different groups over on campus. In particular, the computer science department in the Viterbi School of Engineering. I actually have a faculty appointment in the computer science department, and the chair over there, Sheng-Hua Teng, is incredibly supportive. I'm over there to help with computer science events, and 2 members of my group have also been given faculty appointments as well, so we can advise students and teach classes, and we get an enormous amount of useful interchange for the work that we're doing through that. It's also inspirational to have other groups on campuses as well, and even since the beginning of the Institute, they've always talked about these as sort of other things in the environment that make sense to have the Institute here as well. One of them is certainly the Annenberg School of Communication, which is looking at new media and cultural literacy and all of these kinds of issues that are certainly important to the mission that we have as well. And definitely the School of Cinematic Arts, which at the beginning, when we first started, it was the School of Cinema Television. One of the best film schools in the country. I guess they say, one of the top 2, tied for top with Tisch School of the Arts over at NYU. And, that means that, if your business card says USC on it, then that means something in the entertainment industry. That's a good thing. And they have started over the last couple years since we got here, the interactive media division that is specifically interested in techniques that are available for real-time interactive entertainment, so video games and also the kinds of educational and training applications you can see there as well. So we've got a great relationship with the Interactive Media Division at the School of Cinema Television. We have their faculty over here. I mentioned Mark Bolas is actually in both of our groups. And then having the entertainment industry around as well. Digital Domain is 3 miles that way, Sony ImageWorks is 3 miles that way, Rhythm and Hughes is 2 miles that way, and it's not a long drive to get up to DreamWorks and Disney either. So it's been an awesome place to get to do this work. I couldn't imagine it happening anywhere else.
Well, we're glad to have you as well.
Thank you.
For being here. Okay, perfect. With 1 minute. Okay, so if you could continue to just talk to me, the audio won't be actually in this part.
Okay, got it. Oh, so just like a different view of
Yes,
some
I'm
other
just doing
things.
some different shots.
Understood. So if you
Yes.
need to transition over to a different scene or
Yeah,
get
jump
some,
Exactly.
very good. I think that makes a lot of sense. And certainly, we work hard here too, but it's been fun.
Okay, so just continue talking as you were.
Okay, got it. So yeah, I realized I was actually gesturing over toward the side, and sometimes you've been wanting to look at the light stage, but I have no idea if you've actually established where we are or where. How has Manny been this whole time?
Really
Just
good.
well behaved?
He's looking well. Does he have a name?
I think they call him Manny. I don't name the things around here. We actually have a complete. Oh gosh, it's even in the corner there. I'm going to put it away before we film anything over there. But that's Hedra, which is this totally scary plastic mannequin head or something like that I've really wanted to just throw out several times, but the people use it to focus cameras and things like that. So
Very cool.
Yeah.
Now, can I have you gesture with your hands a few times the way you were when you were talking before?
okay, yes, absolutely. Oh, so we're gonna try to do some of the things. So one of the things is that we were looking over at the light stage, and I was explaining how it's a big sphere of illumination that is got lights all over it, like 156 LEDs. And usually a person gets into the light stage and just kind of stands there for a while, and we photograph them with like 15 different lighting directions, and that will end up giving us the information necessary to essentially reconstruct the shape of their face. We try to get like a couple different angles.
Can I have you straighten your shirt a little bit
Yep.
on the side so I can see the avatar part of it?
Okay, cool.
Perfect. And then continue doing what you were doing.
Okay, so we try to get a couple different angles, like from the side, from the front, and from the right. And then we actually take these 3 scans and we stick them together into one continuous shape of the face. So we can then move that around to different directions. And we can actually move the light around to different directions as well, so that we can show the person under any form of illumination.
Very cool. Okay, and now